Beautiful table here for us to truly understand. Do you remember those wheels of life? And by that I mean we took a look at two circles. One circle was dealing with tonicity, and the other circle was dealing with volume. Do you remember that? And I told you at that time with those circles that you wanted to pay attention to the tonicity first, because that becomes of utmost priority and importance within our body on a day-to-day, breath-by-breath moment. Okay? All right. With that said, tonicity, what was the hormone that was responsible for properly monitoring or regulating your tonicity? I believe it was ADH. That is correct. And the osmotic receptors, remember, all of that also plays a role, as we discussed in the very beginning of this lecture. Let's take all this into consideration. I want to set up this graph. You see it first, and then we're going to walk through the verbiage, not vice versa. I want you to see it first, and then we walk through the words. Otherwise, I'm wasting your time. On the x-axis is a percentage change. On your y-axis actually says plasma ADH. So as you move up the y-axis, you're increasing your plasma ADH, and the x-axis represents the percentage change that is occurring. Now, that's just the parameters. Let us now make sense of all this. What I really need you to also pay attention to is the actual terminology here. That yellow golden line, solid and linear fashion that you're seeing there is your isotonic osmotic increase. I'd like for us to work on that first, please. That linear relationship that you see on that golden line there represents for every percentage increase in tonicity, you find a linear increase of your ADH. So even a little bit of increase of your osmolarity tells your osmotic receptors and signals the release of ADH. That's how important, as I said, plasma osmolarity is to you and how important it is to regulate that. Okay, if that's the case, and that is your osmotic line, what is this green curve that we're seeing? Well, go up to the key, and in the key, you'll notice that this is isotonic volume depletion. Do you see as to how I emphasize depletion? So the percentage change here on your x-axis is representing volume loss percentage. What's that magic number? Do you remember when you had a crossover? What crossover? What does that even mean? Dr. Raj, I don't remember anything that you're saying. Yes, you do. The wheels, the tonicity was one wheel, and that was dealing with ADH, and the other wheel in the circle that I showed you was dealing with aldosterone and volume. And then I told you that tonicity is measured and regulated all of the time, volume when need be with aldosterone. At some point in time, when you have enough volume loss of 10% of the effective circulating volume, you will then have a crossover effect of one circle to another. In other words, you'll have the angiotensin II from the wheel of the volume, which is then going to trigger the release of ADH, which is then going to do what? Now, keep in mind, what the heck is going on here clinically? You've lost greater than 10% of volume. Do you understand the significance of that? Let's just back up. Back up, big picture. Your patient just lost greater than 10% volume. What does that mean? Massive hemorrhage. So what do you think is the most important thing to do in your body? It's to replenish what? The volume, isn't it? So therefore, the osmolarity will then be sacrificed for the replenishment of the volume. That's a lot of information for you to interpret in this graph, and all of it is here, but the only way that you make sense of it is by listening to my previous discussions that we've had about regulation. And if you weren't paying attention there, that's okay. I mean, there's a lot of information. Go back and review those wheels real quick for me. Take a look at that crossover effect. You pay attention to that 10% that I referred to there, and you'll notice that here, take a look at the red box now. That red box, as you move from 0 on the x-axis, 0, 5, 10, that's 10%. Now for volume, that means that you have lost up to or greater than 10%. I want you to move up now, the y-axis. You'll notice, please notice, between 0 and 10%, was there much of a change on your y-axis? Look. Once again, between 0 and 10, was there much of a change on your y-axis? No, there wasn't. It was pretty flat. That means that ADH remained at a relatively constant level. Maybe it increased a little bit. But my goodness, you go beyond 10% loss of your volume, you almost find not just a linear, but this hyperbolic type of curve in which you have a massive release in ADH because the volume must be replenished because your patient is in severe hypovolemic shock. With all that said, let's now walk you through the verbiage that we see here. They're controlled by the hypothalamic osmoreceptors. Who is? Adh secretion. That's the theme of this slide. Adh secretion stimulated by plasma osmolarity. Plasma hypovolemia. Stop there. That's a big deal now, isn't it? When do you have hypovolemia that finally releases ADH? That's the big point. That's the big point. That's the green line. That's the green curve. It is only when you lose greater than 10% in which plasma hypovolemia will release ADH. Apart from that, on a homeostatic control mechanism in which everything's normal, it is plasma osmolarity that truly regulates your ADH, as I said, on a minute-to-minute basis. This crossover effect, meaning who is it that comes from the volume circle that then is going to release ADH to then control, or should I say, release your ADH, and that is going to be angiotensin II. Remember, the angiotensin II was on the wheel of your volume, and that was dealing with sodium and company. You only have that crossover effect with angiotensin II, so therefore that also becomes extremely important. Let's move on to ADH inhibition. So if hyperosmolarity within the plasma therefore released ADH, you'll notice you have hypoosmolality. In other words, your plasma is diluted, thus you're going to inhibit ADH, and plasma hypervolemia, the opposite. Here also, though, it would be, well, we'll take a look at a graph in a little bit where 10% becomes interesting. So at this point, though, your focus should be on volume loss. And once and only after you've understood everything that I've said, you will go on to hypervolemia, but not before that, please. Okay, now over a physiologic range of effective circulating volume, what that represents is from 0 to 10% x-axis, listen, 0 to 10% x-axis, and you don't have much of a change in ADH with volume. In general, only volume depletion. Now, here's the point. Take a look at where now we've had a blank from 0 to 10. The 10 has now been boldened. And look at the verbiage. The words are saying here, depletion of greater than 10% has a severe stimulation of ADH release. And hence you find that the green curve has now taken a drastic increase on your y-axis. What happened here? Hypovolemic shock.